Okay, so one of the things you have to do for the certification exam, and just remember, you get a voucher for the certification exam, but the certification exam is not the written final, okay? But when you take the certification exam, you have to do rote memorization. There's no way around it. The only thing that really helped me is if you go out online, there are a ton of, if you type in CEH flashcards, there are even apps on the App Store. I had one on my phone, so anytime I had a doctor's appointment or something, I had that with me and I did flashcards. No, don't use rope on yourself. That you might do that after you take the exam. That's a joke. That's not for real. But you just have to memorize and memorize and memorize. The best example I ever had for explaining this one was it's a mile wide and a couple inches deep. So it covers a ton of stuff, but not in any super amount of depth. So that's why it's such a difficult certification exam. Whereas your written one that you guys are getting from me is going to have, it's going to be kind of like a practice version made up of ethical hacking practice questions. So it should help you with that. Okay. So this week for week 5, we're doing 11, 12, and 13. So tonight we're going to do session hijacking. Now, before I start that, are there any questions about what I just talked about?
Yeah, actually, the two pieces that you just showed us that you said you were pulling the test questions directly from, are those questions similar to what we'll expect to see on the actual CEH?
They should be similar, but you know, they don't give us those to download because that's considered the proprietary questions, so they don't give us access to those because they want you to pay for the certification exam. So they're basically example questions pulled from previous tests and pulled from stuff out of the text. So we use a format. That list was very nicely made from oh yeah, there you go. There's lists of like version. I wouldn't go too far past version 10, like older than version 10, because past that you're going to have basic concepts that are similar, but there's a lot of the technology is going to be drastically different. But that was very nicely made by Jay, and they are pulled out of the text and they are done in a format similar to what you're going to see on a CERT exam. So they're not word for word what you're going to see in a CERT exam because we don't have access to those. Even though we pay through the nose for all this stuff, we still don't get access to the actual certification questions because, again, proprietary exam, and they want to charge us for it. So you know how it is when it comes to companies that make money off of stuff like that. So
yeah, anytime, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, anytime you go like that, they'll give you like an example, but they write it kind of like it, but it's not, you know. But yeah, they're examples that we try to kind of simulate what you're going to see.
Yeah, so ultimately it will help.
It will help. It'll give you knowledge. It'll be good for quizzing. One of the things that I did out, I don't know if they have an updated version. I think it was the Sunshine. Let me stop sharing and see if they still have a newer version of it. It was some sort of study guide. I can't remember the name. It was like Sun something. I may have to go back and look through my records. Let me put a note down. But they had a basically like a crash course PDF. So let me go look in my, because I kept I'm a bit of a hoarder when it comes to certification exams because I never knew who's going to take what. And I never know what's going to help me in the future. So all right. So let me reshare my screen. I will share those resources like I usually do on our resource channel when I find them. And if I find an actual document that I think, oh, this is awesome, I will go out and put it in your documents. Okay, so tonight, our learning objectives. Summarize the session hijacking concepts, explain application level session hijacking, network level session hijacking. We're going to look at some session hijacking tools. And then, of course, we're going to end out by session hijacking countermeasures. Okay. So what is session hijacking? So this you'll see, this is in depth from what we've talked about a little bit previously. So session hijacking refers to an attack in which an attacker seizes control of a valid TCP communication session between two computers. So those man in the middle things, this is similar to that. As most authentications only occur at the start of a TCP session, this allows the attacker to gain access to the machine. Attackers can sniff all the traffic from the established TCP sessions and perform identity theft, information theft, fraud, etc. The attacker steals a valid session ID and uses it to authenticate themselves to the server. So you have, I love their little graphics they have some pretty decent ones on what it actually looks like. So why is session hijacking successful? Well, if you have an absence of account lockouts for invalid session IDs, you know how when you get hammered multiple times, you should have a certain amount of times where you lock that out. Indefinite session timeout, so there should be a period of time that times out after. Weak session ID generation algorithm or small session IDs. Basically, that means that you just don't have enough oomph behind them to give you, it's kind of like when you use a poor encryption algorithm. It's the same kind of thing. Most computers using TCP/IP are vulnerable. Insecure handling of session IDs, and most countermeasures do not work without encryption. So what's the process? All right. So the process goes upwards on this one. So sniff. Place yourself between the victim and the target so you can sniff the network. Monitor. Then you monitor the flow of the packets and predict the sequence number. Then you session desynchronization. You desynchronize the person. You break the connection to the victim's machine. Session ID prediction. Then you take over the session. And here's your command injection. Start throwing packets to the target server. All right, here is packet analysis of a local session hijack. So, do you remember talking about SYNAC? This is them. You can see that here. See the SYN, AC, and that's our three-way right there. And that's, you can see them taking a look at that, and I'm watching what's going. So, and they have a little note over here: before the user sends the next data packet, the attacker predicts the next sequence number and sends the data to the server. This leads to the establishment, if it's successful and they predicted it correctly, establishment of the connection between the attacker and the server. So this is why you have to have that timeout, because they're not, the chances of them being right on the first try are very slim. They have to be very lucky. Yep.
Quick question.
Yeah.
So when I think of this, like in my mind, this pops up as something that would have become a lot more of an issue since the rapid spread and prevalence. I can't think of basically working remote.
Yes. If you're not using a VPN, and if you're using a VPN tunneling that has crappy encryption, anything where you have to come in remotely is going to be more vulnerable than if you're already inside the network moving around. All right, so what types of session hijacking? Like everything else we've talked about, there's passive and active. So passive, the attacker hijacks the session, but they just sit there and watch and record the traffic in that session. So usually they do that in order to prepare for an active attack, which the attacker finds an active session and then they seize control of it. So session hijacking in the OSI model, there's the network level hijacking, which can be defined as the interception of packets during the transmission between the client and the server in a TCP or UDP session, or there's application level hijacking. And this refers to the gaining of control over the HTTP user session by obtaining the session ID. So that's also why there's a lot of remember us talking about why this is why you should use HTTPS. It depends on how weak their encryption on HTTPS is, and if they are not doing, Gwen's data sanitization cartoon, if they're not doing data sanitization, there's also some issues possible with that as well. All right, spoofing versus hijacking. So a spoofing attack, the attacker pretends to be another user or machine to gain access. The attacker does not seize control of an existing active session. Instead, they initiate a new session using stolen credentials. However, hijacking is the process of seizing control of an existing active session. The attacker relies on the legitimate user to create a connection and authenticate. Okay, so there's the difference. Spoofing, you pretend to be the user. Hijacking, you actually steal the active session. All right, application level session hijacking. In a session hijacking attack, a session token is stolen or a valid session token is predicted to gain unauthorized access to the web server. So a session token can be compromised in various ways. Session sniffing, man-in-the-middle attacks, cross-site scripting, session replay. Okay, so before I go into session replay, here's a little knowledge check for you guys. Do you remember what cross-site scripting is? I know I'm reaching back a couple of classes. Anyone? Don't make me call on Gwen, guys.
Sorta, isn't it when they inject certain scripts in order to take over, or kind of like in order to probe for a vulnerability?
They can be used for both. Yes, they are putting scripts or it's kind of like, how we talked about SQL injection. Instead of SQL being injected, it's scripting language like JavaScript, or sometimes if it's a really poorly programmed website, it can actually be flat up HTML. Usually, though, it's like JavaScript or something like that. Session replay attack, crime attack, session donation attack, predictable session tokens. This is a problem that needs to be fixed. Looks like I'm going out of order, but it doesn't matter. Man in the browser attack. Do you remember the man? We kind of brushed on that one, man in the browser versus man in the middle attack. Oh, CS2 got nailed. Okay, so man in the middle is, they were talking about two connections. Man in the browser, they actually go after the browser in order to get the information. And a lot of times they'll pop up do you remember when we were looking at HTML sanitization and they were talking about some web pages, how they would just flat out, extensions are a really good example of man in the browser attacks. But a very, very simplistic one is, do you remember how if you put the code in a certain way that you could actually literally bookmark the results that you put out? that is also a very simple way to do a man in the browser attack, because you're literally sitting between them and the browser instead of them and the server where they're going. So that's the difference. Cross-site request forgery attack, session fixation for attack, forbidden attack, and petite podum hijacking. That's actually a new one to me. Okay. Or maybe it's just a different. I'm noticing they're updating some of the terminology. So compromising session IDs using sniffing and by predicting session tokens. All right, so compromising session IDs using sniffing. So your attacker uses a sniffer to capture your valid session token or session ID. The attacker then uses the valid token session to gain unauthorized access to the web server. So you see down here, you have your victim with their valid session, then you have the attacker grabbing that, sniffing that session with their tools, and then using it, stealing it, and then using it to get to the web server. Compromising session IDs by predicting session tokens. Attackers can predict session IDs generated by weak algorithms and impersonate a website user. Attackers analyze variable sections of session IDs to determine a pattern. The analysis is performed manually or using various cryptanalytic tools. You know that how we talked about script kiddies going out and downloading tools? Well, some hackers make these for other hackers too, and they'll go out and go, hey, I've made this tool and I've used this, created this used a cryptanalytic tool, and boom, here you go. Now you can use this to predict a session token against people using this type of session ID pattern generator. The attacker then collects a high number of simultaneous session IDs to gather samples in the same time window and keep the variable constant.
So I do have a question. I know it's not going to be like an exact replication, but when you say predicting the session ID, they're essentially using tools similar to how we would to like recreate a hash, like an MD5 hash, and they figure out the algorithm.
Yeah, it's very similar. As you see right here, we're talking about predicting session tokens or session IDs. So they use custom algorithms a lot of times on these web servers, or a predefined pattern. And if they don't update their algorithm, because you know how we talk about, it's really important to update your software. It's really important to patch your software. Well, it's also really important to update your encryption and these types of custom algorithms. So if you're using a custom algorithm from 20 years ago, it's definitely going to be easier to go after. So it's kind of the same thing as somebody using an old MD5 hash and where they're supposed to be using AES 25 or 512 encryption. It's a huge difference. Okay. So does that make sense?
Yeah, and then just for I don't know how well it would compare, but looking at the HTTP text right there in the captures box versus the actual URL in your screen, the session ID isn't displayed in the URL, correct? Or is it like just kind of depending again on that algorithm and how they have everything set up?
It depends on the algorithm. The session ID shouldn't be displayed. It should be like an encrypted gobbledygook thing that you see. But again, it depends on what they're using.
Sorry, German. Nothing could fix Tarkov.
Okay, so we were talking about custom algorithms. Then the attacker uses a unique session value, or they deduce the session ID to hack the session. So here on the top, captures. The attacker captures several session IDs and analyzes the pattern. So they go, okay, here's this. These four are constant. These seem to be the date. And these appear to be the time. And that is a terrible, I'm sure you guys have figured out, absolutely terrible way to do this. So then they go, okay, now I can go out and just paste this in and predict the session ID, which if there was someone using this, shame on them, obviously. I'm pretty sure that you guys looking at this, what 162,555, what would the next value be? And this is just your cheap, simple knowledge check.
Me no,
What would
no,
the-
me stupid.
162,555. What would the next number on that be? Just type it into chat. You don't have to type the whole thing, just type the last 6. Yep, yeah, basically it's just incremental from there. And anything that uses incremental like this is really bad. Very funny. So anything that does incremental is terrible. Anything where they have a huge chunk that's that consistent, like the constant date and time that's that easily is just terrible. This is just a terrible example all the way around. But it does give you an idea of how they do it. Meaning, if you see someone actually doing that, you need to contact their people and go, guys, need to update this. Okay, compromising session IDs using man-in-the-middle manipulator or manipulator in the middle attacks. Man in the middle or manipulator in the middle attacks are used to intrude into an existing connection between systems and intercept messages being exchanged. So your attacker uses different techniques to split the connection, the TCP connection, into 2 connections, client to attacker or attacker to server. After the interception of the TCP connection, an attacker can read, modify, and insert fraudulent data into the intercepted communication. In the case of HTTP transaction, the TCP connection between the client and the server becomes the target. So over here, you see our little picture here for the man in the middle. So they see all of this, and then they start transferring whatever they want back and forth. All right, compromising session IDs using man in the browser, manipulator in the browser. So with these, the attack uses a Trojan horse to intercept calls between the browser and its security mechanism or libraries. So like you were talking about, your extensions, it works with an already installed Trojan horse and acts between browser and its security mechanisms. Its main objective is to cause financial deceptions by manipulating transactions of internet banking systems. So this was originally caused so that people could log into what they thought was their bank. And it's like, oh yeah, yep, this is your bank. Go ahead and put all your security mechanisms in here, and then they get swiped. All right, here are the steps for man in the browser. Trojan first infects the computer's software or OS or application. Trojan installs malicious code, extension files, and saves it into the browser configuration. After the user restarts the browser, malicious code in the form of extension files is loaded. Extension files register a handler for every visit to the web page. When the page is loaded, the extension uses the URL and matches it with a list of known sites targeted for attack. The user logs in securely to the website. Trojan registers a button event handler. Remember us talking about those in HTTP? When a specific page load is detected for a specific pattern and compares it with its target list. When the user clicks on the button, the extension uses DOM interface and extracts all data from all form fields, and then it modifies the values. The browser sends the form and modified values to the server. The server receives the modified values but cannot distinguish between the original and the modified values. After the server performs the transaction, a receipt is generated. Now the browser receives the receipt for the modified transaction. Browser displays receipt with original details. User thinks original transaction was received by the server without any interceptions. Compromising session IDs using client-side attacks. So cross-site scripting. XSS enables attackers to inject malicious client-side scripts into the web pages viewed by others. Then there's malicious JavaScript. Malicious script can be embedded into a web page that does not generate any warning, but it captures session tokens in the background and sends them to the attacker. And then Trojan can change the proxy settings in the user's browser and send all sessions through the attacker's machine. So here's an example of the cross-site scripting. If an attacker sends a crafted link to the victim with malicious JavaScript, JavaScript will run and complete the instructions made by the attacker when the victim clicks on the link. So, step 1, attacker sends malicious link with the malicious JavaScript crafted into it. 2, user clicks on the link. 3, user follows instructions made by the attacker and confirms session identifier. Thus, the attacker steals the session identifier. And then here you see the little identifier. Boom, they're on the server with the session identifier.
It kind of makes me laugh with the emails that the obvious spam emails that are basically just links for these, like, oh look here, this is your bank, or we had somewhere like me, I don't have an account with Wells Fargo anymore, but I did at one point, and I still get emails like, you have this with Wells Fargo, like, oh, someone's used your bank account and you need to log this in. And I'm like, I look at it and I'll just spend like a solid 10-15 seconds just looking through at a glance of like what's wrong with the email.
Yeah,
And-
I've seen those in emails and SMS texts as well.
Oh yeah, the texts are starting to get really annoying. Like I get those.
Yeah, I just
quite often
blocklist
now.
those now.
But some of them, it's like, are they even trying? With
They
like,
really
look
are.
at this with the email that, oh, click on this email link, or, and I'm just like, there's, first off, it's not Wells Fargo's email, so why would I click this? Like,
You know, it seems super simplistic to us, but you would not believe how many users I had that got nailed by and this is verbatim. I am in a meeting. I need you to contact me immediately. I can't turn my phone on, so you need to reply to this email. This really happened. This is something that happened and actually caught multiple people. They didn't read through it. They didn't look at the email to realize, oh, this email address isn't our domain. And it had a generic, you know, all of the telltale flags that should have said, dude, don't do this. And then when you reply to it, they say, oh, I need you to make a purchase for me. Go out and buy me several $100s worth of iTunes cards. Yes, this actually caught people.
and those people are allowed to breathe.
Yes, those people went through extensive training afterward. But yes, it is very common, and it was one that worked on multiple people for hundreds and thousands of dollars. So yes, it seems ridiculous to us, but these are like basic form letters that they can use. And then when they throw in some of the fancy things like this, and I use air quotes on fancy, they definitely are getting people clicking on them.
Hey,
Yes,
Steve,
the Walmart emails. Yes, German.
I was gonna say, it's like that situation where, if you say banana slow enough, it sounds like gullible. And some
Right.
people actually like think it through without even before they even, without even thinking about it until afterwards. They're like, wait
Yeah,
a sec.
they just go for it. Yes. Yeah.
Our species is doomed.
Yeah. If anyone went by our IT and help desk information, yeah, it would be sad. Yes. Okay. Compromising session IDs using client-side attacks, cross-site request forgery attack, or CSRF. This one exploits the victim's active session with a trusted site to perform malicious activities. So you can see here, hold on, let me check how many slides we have. Okay, we're good. Attacker places malicious link or image or whatever on your target website. Then user logs into the legitimate website. They establish their session. User visits the attacker website, clicks on the link, and then the attacker gets the user's session ID and gets access. Okay. Compromising session IDs using session replay attacks. So a session replay attack, the attacker listens to the conversation between the user and the server and captures the authentication token of the user. Once the authentication token is captured, the attacker replays the request to the server with the captured authentication token and gains unauthorized access to the server. So see this, user establishes connection to server. Server asks for authentication information for the sake of identity proof. User sends authentication token. Attacker eavesdrops on the conversation, the traffic is what they're talking about, and captures authentication tokens of the user. Attacker then replays the captured authentication token to the server to get that unauthorized access. Compromising session IDs using session fixation. So session fixation is an attack that allows an attacker to hijack a valid user session. The attacker attempts to lure a user to authenticate him or herself with a known session ID, then hijacks the user validated session with the knowledge of the user of the used session ID. The attacker has to provide legitimate web application session ID and attempt to lure the victim browser to use it. Some techniques for executing the session fixation attack are session tokens in the URL argument, session tokens in the hidden form fields, session IDs in a cookie. The attacker exploits vulnerability of the server that allows the user to use a fixed SID. The attacker provides a valid SID to a victim and lures him or her to authenticate using that SID. So one, hi, John, check this out. Here's some blah, blah, blah. Thanks, customer care, Citibank. Victim clicks on the link, logs into the vulnerable server. Attacker, then they log in. And then 4, you can see they use the same SID. Session hijacking using proxy servers. An attacker lures the victim to click on a bogus link, which looks legit, but redirects the user to the attacker server. And the attacker forwards the request to the legitimate server on behalf of the victim and serves as a proxy for the entire transaction. The attacker then captures the session's information during the interaction of the legitimate server and user. So here you see your click here for 50% off at Amazon. Victim, yay, click. 3 forwards the request, then they act as a nice little proxy, and then they get all of that transaction information. Session hijacking using crime attack. Compression ratio information leak made easy. I think they just randomly throw things at words so they sound cool on these. As a client-side attack that exploits the vulnerabilities present in data compression feature of protocols like SSL, TLS, SBDY, and HTTPS. And attackers hijack the session by decrypting secret session cookies. The authentication information obtained from the session cookies is used to establish a new session with the web application. So, attacker tricks the victim to click malicious link, which contains the malicious crime JavaScript. They establish an HTTP session. Then they sniff the HTTPS traffic and capture all the cookies. And then you can see down here, HTTPS request, you see the cookies, and then you see them pulling things back and forth down here. Session hijacking using forbidden attack. A forbidden attack is a type of man-in-the-middle attack used to hijack HTTPS sessions. It exploits the reuse of cryptographic nonce during the TLS handshake. After hijacking the HTTPS session, the attacker injects malicious code and forged content that prompts the victim to disclose sensitive information like bank accounts, numbers, passwords, social security numbers, etc. So you see the TLS handshake, sniff the traffic, use the knots to hijack the session. Traffic between the server and victim goes to the attacker. Injection of code, and then they reveal their information. Session hijacking using session donation attack. In a session donation attack, an attacker donates their own session ID to the target user. The attacker first obtains the valid SID by logging into a service and later feeds the same SID to the target user. This SID links a target user back to the attacker's account page without any information to the victim. So, victim. Okay, start over here. Attacker logs into service and establishes a legitimate connection. Then it issues an SID. The attacker donates their SID and lures the victim into clicking on their nice little link. Victim clicks on the link and enters their details into that SID. Attacker logs in and takes all of their information. It's surprising. You remember me talking about fear-based motivations? A lot of times they try to use fear-based and panic-induced language in order to override people's sensibilities to actually look legitimately at these. Because, I mean, most people have been through some form of training, and an @gmail.com or those usually raise warnings. But if you panic them enough, then you override some of that. So yeah, that is a legitimate issue. Petit Podem attack hijacking. In this attack, a domain controller is forced by an attacker to initiate authentication to the attacker's server. The attacker then uses Microsoft's encrypting file system remote protocol API for authentication session hijacking. The attacker relays the NTLM authentication shared by the domain controller to the Active Directory certification services server and generates a certificate to acquire admin level privileges. Okay. So, 1, having legitimate user NTLM credentials. 2, provides NTML credentials for authentication. And then attackers SMB server addresses. Then domain controller gives the NTLM authentication. Then NTLM authentication is replayed. And then they generate the AD cert and they have admin level privileges now. Okay, we have about 25 slides left. Network level session hijacking. The network level hijacking relies on hijacking transport and internet protocols used by web applications and the application layer. By attacking network level sessions, the attacker gathers some critical information which are used to attack application level sessions. So we have blind hijacking, UDP hijacking, TCP/IP hijacking, RST hijacking, man in the middle packet sniffer, IP spoofing with source routed packets. TCP/IP hijacking involves using spoofed packets to seize control of the connection between the victim and target machine. Victim connection hangs and the attacker is then able to communicate with the host machine as if the attacker is the victim. To launch a TCP/IP hijacking attack, the attacker must be on the same network as the victim. The target server and the victim machine can be located anywhere. IP spoofing, source routed packets. The packet source routing technique is used for gaining unauthorized access to a computer with the help of trusted host IP address. An attacker spoofs a host IP address so that the server managing a session with the host accepts packets from the attacker. When the session is established, the attacker injects forged packets before the host responds to the server. The original packet from the host is lost as the server receives the packet with a sequence number already used by the attacker. The packets from the attacker are source routed through the host with the destination IP specified by the attacker. RST hijacking. RST hijacking involves injecting an authentic looking reset packet or RST packet using a spoof source address and predicting the acknowledgement number. A hacker can reset a victim's connection if it uses an accurate acknowledgement number. The victim would believe the source sent the reset packet and reset the connection. RST hijacking can be performed using a packet crafting tool like Colosoft Packet Builder and TCP/IP analysis tools like TCP dump. So 1 sends the data packet to server machine. You can see the packet here. 3, attacker spoofs IP address of machine, and then they predict the ACK number and send the reset to reset the connection. Blind and UDP hijacking. So blind hijacking, an attacker can inject malicious data or commands into the intercepted communications in the TCP session, even if the source routing is disabled. The attacker can send the data or commands, but has no access to see the response. That's why it's called blind hijacking. So you can see here, they intercept and then go on from there. UDP hijacking, network level session hijacking, where the attacker sends forged server reply to a victim's UDP request before the intended server replies to it. The attacker uses a man-in-the-middle attack to intercept the server's response to the client and then sends a forged reply. As you can see, it's just kind of a reverse of what looks like over here with UDP. Man-in-the-middle attack using forged ICMP and ARP spoofing. In this attack, the packet sniffer is used as an interface between the client and server. An attacker changes the default gateway of the client's machine and attempts to reroute the packets. The packets between the client and the server are routed through the hijacker's host using 2 techniques as shown below. Forged Internet Control Message Protocol. It's an extension of the IP to send error messages where the attacker can send messages to fool the client and server. And then the ARP spoofing. ARP is used to map the network layer address to link layer MAC address. All right, session hijacking tools. There's HEDI. This is an HTTP toolkit that allows attackers to perform man-in-the-middle HTTP proxy attacks using logs and advanced search. You can see that here. BetterCap, it's like EtterCap, but with B in there, allows security researchers and red teams and reverse engineers to perform reconnaissance and various attacks on IPv4 and 6 networks. And that looks like, yep, that's Parrot. So those of you that have messed around with Parrot, I believe BetterCap is on Kali, or it can be installed on Kali as well. OWASP Zap is an integrated penetration testing tool for finding vulnerabilities in web applications. It's got a nice little GUI. There's also things like Burp Suite and that down here, Websploit and things like that. Making sure I didn't miss anything. All right, countermeasures. So, session hijacking detection methods. So there's the manual method where you use packet sniffing software, but that can get very labor intensive. And then there's the automatic method where you use the IDS and IDPS, or you use the combo that has the IDPS. Protecting against session hijacking, here's some steps. Use secure shell or SSH to create secure communication channels. Implement the log out functionality for the user to end the session. So why do you think that would help? Just checking to make sure you guys are awake. Why would implementing the log out functionality for your users to end the session help against session hijacking? Go ahead.
Because it means they'll, if they have to log out when they end the session, it means that someone else can't be sitting there still using their session.
Yes, exactly. And someone else also? Yes, both of you. Good job, Nick and Steve. Generate session IDs after a successful login and accept only session IDs generated by the server. Ensure data in transit is encrypted and implement the defense in-depth mechanism. Use string or long random numbers as session keys. So you remember me talking about that. This is a really bad example, Right here is an example of them saying, this is why it's a really bad example. Use different usernames and passwords for different accounts. Implement timeout to destroy sessions when it expires. Avoid including session IDs in the URL or query string. That should be basic programming, but I'm surprised how many don't actually do that. Ensure client-side and server-side protection software are in the active state and up to date. Use strong authentication like Kerberos or peer-to-peer virtual private networks. Configure appropriate internal and external spoof rules on your gateways. Use IDS products or ARP Watch for monitoring ARP cache poisoning. Use HTTP public key pinning to allow users to authenticate web servers. And enable browsers to verify website authentication using network notary servers. So, and we were also talking about the bad practices people do. Here are some web development guidelines to prevent session hijacking. Create session keys with lengthy strings and random numbers so that it's difficult for attackers to guess a valid session. Regenerate the session ID after a successful login to prevent session fixation attacks. Encrypt the data and session key transferred between the user and web servers. Make the session expire as soon as the user logs out. Prevent eavesdropping within the network. Reduce the lifespan of a session or a cookie. Do not create sessions for unauthenticated users until it is necessary. Ensure HTTP only while using cookies for session IDs. Check whether all requests received for current sessions originate from the same IP address and user agent. Implement continuous device verification to identify whether the user who established the session is still in control. Implement risk-based authentication at different levels before giving access to sensitive information, and perform authentication and integrity verification between VPN endpoints. Web user guidelines to prevent session hijacking. Do not click on links received through emails or IMs. Remember how I joked about how security analysts, 90% of the job is telling people what not to click on? Notice how that's number one. Use firewalls and prevent malicious content from entering the network. Use firewalls and browser settings to restrict cookies. Ensure that the website is certified by certifying authorities. Ensure that you clear history, offline content, and cookies from your browser after every confidential and sensitive transaction. Prefer HTTPS, a secure transmission over HTTP when transmitting sensitive and confidential data. Log out from the browser by clicking on the logout button instead of closing the browser. This is for the user, but in the programming, you can also put something in there that when they shut the browser, there's a time. Remember how they talked about the timeout rule? People that shut the browser, the timeout rule will time out after. Yeah, exactly. They should not be using HTTP. But that's why the timeout rule is there, is for people who just close the browser. Session hijacking detection tools. USM Anywhere. This delivers threat detection, incident response, and compliance management across cloud, on-prem, and etc. Wireshark, our favorite. You can capture and interactively browse traffic running on your computer network. Approaches causing vulnerability to session hijacking and their preventative solutions. So Telnet RLogin, you should not be using those. OpenSSH or SSHL is the solution because it sends encrypted data and makes it difficult for an attacker to send correctly encrypted data if a session is hijacked. FTP, the solution is SFTP, ATP, MFT, FTPS. Implementing these protocols reduces the chance of successful hijack by sending data using encryption and digital certificates. HTTP, use SSL or TLS to reduce the chances of having a successful hijack. IP, use IPsec to prevent hijacking by securing your IP communications. Any remote connection, you all should say it with me together. Use a VPN. implementing encrypted VPNs such as TP, L2PT, IPsec for remote connections prevents session hijacking. SMB, use SMB signing to to improve the security of the SMB protocol and reduce the chances of session hijacking. Hub network should not be there, should be a switch network to mitigate the risk of ARP spoofing and other session hijacking attacks. HTTP strict, so this is HSTS. This is a web security policy that protects HTTPS websites against man-in-the-middle attacks, allows the web server to enforce web browsers to interact with it using secure HTTPS protocol. There's token binding. When a user logs onto a web application, it generates a cookie with a SID called a token. Token binding protects client-server communications against session hijacking attacks. And then there's HPKP, which is a trust of first use, tofu, sorry, I just think that's hilarious, technique used in an HTTP header. HPKP allows a web client to associate specific public key certs with a particular server to minimize the risk of man-in-the-middle attacks. Then there's DNS over HTTPS, is an enhanced version of DNS protocol, which is used to prevent snooping of the user's web activities or DNS queries during DNS lookup process. The web query traffic is sent through encrypted HTTPS via port 443. Okay, WEP WPA encryption. They're different wireless protocols intended to protect traffic that's sent received over users over wireless networks. The implementation of these protocols can thwart unwanted users connecting to the network and prevent man-in-the-middle attacks. VPN is your creating an encrypted tunnel, and same thing. You have to it stops those attacks by encrypting data flow. Two-factor authentication gives you that extra layer of protection as it provides another vector of authentication in addition to the password. To implement two-factor authentication can prevent attackers from performing session hijacking and brute forcing their way into a user account. Password managers, we all know what those are, hopefully, is an application or tool used to protect and manage individual credentials. Using a password manager, passwords are stored in a secure location and encapsulated using a master key. Zero trust principle is a set of standards user pre-verification procedures that require all users, inside or out, to be authenticated before providing access to any resource. These principles work based on the famous trust but verify. IPsec, this is your secured IP, is a protocol suite developed by IETF for securing IP communications by authenticating and encrypting each IP packet of communication session. It's deployed widely to implement VPNs and for remote user access through dial-up connections to private networks. So components, and I will say, when I took the CEH, I got tons of questions about IPsec for some reason. I don't know if it's just that they happened to hit me at that, or if they just like those questions. IPsec driver, Internet Key Exchange, Internet Security Association Key Management Protocol, Oakley IPsec Policy Agent are components. Benefits, network level pure authentication, data origin authentication, data integrity, data confidentiality, encryption, and replay protection. Here's some examples. I am going to let you go through this. There's transport mode and tunnel mode, and I will tell you right now, you will see this on a test question. Maybe not mine, but you will definitely see this on a certification exam. I have gotten this kind of on multiple. What is the difference between this type of transportation mode? Know the difference between transport and tunnel mode, okay? This is actually a very nice little slide to remember that, so you might want to steal that image from the course document slides and keep it. IPsec authentication and confidentiality. So this uses two different security services for authentication and confidentiality. The authentication header, which provides the data authentication of the sender, and encapsulation security payload, which, and that's something you need to remember about IPsec, it encapsulates your data. Just remember that key phrase. Provides both the data authentication and encryption confidentiality of the sender. Okay, session hijacking preventative tools. There's CSEC, which is a unique source code analysis solution that provides tools to identify, track, and repair technical and logical flaws in source code. And then there's Fiddler. I've actually played with this a long time ago, but it's used to for the security testing of web apps, such as decrypting HTTPS traffic and manipulating requests using an MITM, the decryption technique. These are just basically to mess with your code to make sure that you don't have these issues. All right, so what did we learn? I'm going to sum up because there was a lot. So session hijacking concepts, the different types of session hijacking, application and network level session hijacking. We had a whole bunch of session hijacking tools. We learned how to detect, protect, and defend against session hijacking, as well as various session hijacking detection and prevention tools. And then we concluded with our detailed discussion on various countermeasures that you can use to prevent session hijacking attempts by threat actors. Now, are there any questions? I know session hijacking can be a little dense, but are there any questions about anything? Oh, that's a bad joke, Nick. But exactly, Stephen. Are there any questions about the man in the middle session hijacking or anything else on this? It seems like you guys have a good understanding. You seem to have popped up with the question answers fairly quickly. No questions? All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the lecture portion here, and then I will discuss some homework stuff with you guys.